Well, my name's Godfrey Evans, and I've been working at the National Museums of Scotland since 1982. And when I arrived at the National Museums, I was surprised at how many items they had from Hamilton Palace from the 1882 sale. And 3 years later, I had to raise money for one of the great items in Hamilton Palace, the travelling service of Princess Pauline Borghese. And various other items followed, including the old drawing rooms from the Baroque palace, and lots of silver and gold. And I thought it was about time that I really understood what the Hamiltons were up to, what Hamilton Palace actually contained. And I was very fortunate. The late Duke of Hamilton encouraged me, and I got unprecedented access into the Hamilton archive. And his son, the 16th Duke, has also been very, very supportive. So out of the items in the museum and Hamilton archive, my contacts in American museums and so forth, I've been able to go on, after a PhD on the 10th Duke, to do an 18-chapter book on Hamilton Palace, which runs from about 1450 through to the present day. And that's going to be published very shortly, hopefully in January or February of next year. This is just a small part of the book, which will be published early next year. Now, as most of you know, Hamilton Palace was undoubtedly Scotland's grandest private residence and outstanding treasure house. It was, in fact, two palaces, a south-facing Baroque palace built by the third Duke of Hamilton and his wife, Duchess Anne, the daughter of the first Duke of Hamilton, in the 1690s. And then an enormous 263-foot-long northern addition, designed by the 10th Duke of Hamilton and the Glasgow architect David Hamilton, that was constructed between 1824 and 1830. As a final touch, between about 1848 and his death in 1852, the 10th Duke erected a large new family mausoleum to the northeast of the new extension. The old palace obviously contained large collections of paintings and other items. However, these were massively augmented and totally transformed by the 10th Duke of Hamilton during the first half of the 19th century. Born in 1767, the future 10th Duke of Hamilton was inordinately proud of his status as the 10th Duke of Hamilton, the 7th Duke of Brandon, and the Premier Peer of Scotland. Moreover, he also claimed to be Duke of Châtellerault, a peerage awarded by King Henry II of France to one of his ancestors, the 2nd Earl of Arran, in 1548-49. That, though, was not all, because Alexander also saw himself as a rightful heir to the throne of Scotland after the death of Cardinal Henry, Duke of York, the last direct male member of the Stuart Kings of Scotland in 1807. This claim was based on the marriage of the first Lord Hamilton to a daughter of King James II of Scotland in 1474, and the Duke of Châtellerault being heir presumptive to Mary Queen of the Scots in the mid-16th century. Now, Alexander would never have become such an exalted figure if Douglas, the 8th Duke, had not died of alcoholism without a legitimate male heir at the age of 43 in August 1799, and the Hamilton titles and estates had not passed to his father, Lord Archibald Hamilton, the second son of the 5th Duke of Hamilton. Alexander was exhilarated to become the Marquis of Douglas and Clydesdale, the titles assigned to the eldest sons and heirs of the Dukes of Hamilton. And within 6 months of his father's succession, he purchased this enormous altarpiece, 400 centimetres high, showing the Virgin and Child with 4 saints, by the Italian painter Girolamo da Libre of about 1520. This was purchased during one of his visits to Italy. It's now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, and it's so large that they can't contain it, accommodate it in their new Italian Renaissance galleries. Alexander followed up on this and his other acquisitions of important old master paintings by collecting very, very good items while he was in St. Petersburg as the British ambassador to Russia in 1807-1808. These included specially commissioned bronze busts of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great after Estrelli and Houdon, and a full-length tapestry of the Empress Catherine woven by the Imperial Tapestry Factory. After his return to Britain, the Duke went on to assemble an almost unbelievable collection of works associated with his hero, the Emperor Napoleon. This began with him commissioning a full-length painting of Britain's dreaded enemy from Napoleon's own official painter, Jacques-Louis David, in 1811, while Napoleon's control of Europe was at its zenith, and for which David requested 1,000 guineas. It subsequently led to Alexander forming very close friendships with Napoleon's mother, his uncle Cardinal Fesch, and his favourite sister Princess Pauline Borghese in Rome after Napoleon's defeat and exile, and to Pauline's bequest of her wonderful travelling service to the Duke in 1825. Once again, though, this led on to the purchase of a silver-gilt tea service supplied in connection with Napoleon's marriage to the Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria from the royal household of Charles X of France in 1830, shown on the right, and to the very targeted acquisition at auction of Bertel Thorvaldsen's colossal marble bust of the Emperor Napoleon apotheosized or deified in 1846. So great was Alexander's obsession with Napoleon that he worked for 3 years with Lieutenant Colonel Stepney Cowell of British Military Intelligence and the Foreign Office to get his son, William, to finally marry the Princess Marie of Baden in 1843. William didn't like this, and he really resented being pushed by his mother and father into this marriage. The reason for being pushed into this marriage was that Marie was the daughter of Stephanie, Dowager Grand Duchess of Baden, who was herself the adopted daughter of the Emperor Napoleon and the only member of the Bonaparte family to retain her position after Napoleon's defeat and exiling in 1815. Here you see the amazing reception when the newly married couple arrived at Hamilton Palace in 1843, escorted by 1,500 horsemen and 200 gentlemen's carriages. Quite a reception. While all this was going on, Alexander was also amassing a huge collection of superb 18th century French furniture and decorative art, which included no less than 11 preeminent pieces by the outstanding French royal ébéniste Jean-Henri Risner. Many of his acquisitions of French furniture and fittings have been made for important French individuals, and this can be seen here. The top 5 pieces by Risner were made for Queen Marie Antoinette herself in the early 1780s, and the others for her husband, Louis XVI, and the Comtesse de Provence, the wife of Louis XVI's eldest brother. Here is a plan of the first floor of Hamilton Palace, with the old Baroque part in the lower half and the Duke's addition at the top. We're going to begin with the old staterooms in the west wing of the old palace and the famous long gallery called the Picture Gallery here, which was also part of the old palace but was much altered by the 10th Duke. Once we've considered these, we're going to look at how the Duke quite ruthlessly and brutally developed some aspects of his alterations to dramatically impress, disorientate and frighten visitors as they entered the new edition and gradually made their way through it. After his return from Russia, Alexander began by developing the 5 relatively small old staterooms here. He was going to develop them into a picture gallery cum treasury. He was able to deploy about 60-odd old master paintings that his father had transported up from his house in London and his own recent and later acquisitions. On the left you can see 2 of his father's paintings. The Departure of Abraham from Canaan by Jacopo and Francesco Bassano, and The Lamentation over the Dead Christ by Nicholas Poussin, now in National Galleries of Canada and Ireland. And on the right, The Loves Vicentas by Rubens, which Alexander purchased as a wedding present to himself less than a fortnight before he married Susan Euphemia Beckford in 1810, and Joseph and Jacob in Egypt by Pontormo, the Mannerist painter. This one he purchased in Rome in 1821. These are now in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon and the National Gallery in London. Alexander combined these and many other old master paintings with some of the most impressive items made of sardonyx, lapis lazuli, jade, agate and other precious and semi-precious stones that he had acquired in Russia. He believed that the Byzantine sardonyx bowl on the left had been the holy water stoup of the Emperor Charlemagne and had come from Cologne Cathedral, while the Mughal nephrite bowl, bottom left, was clearly decorated in gold with the royal arms of Navarre and France, the kings of France. Alexander displayed these items on or with very impressive old and recently made furniture made of gilt bronze, marquetry, Japanese lacquer and pietra dura, that's coloured semi-precious stones. And these items were fitted with tops of porphyry, malachite or various types of marble. As time went by, he added 2 huge tables with porphyry tops that he had bought in Rome in 1817 and mounted on heavy gilt bronze stands that were specially made for him by the Parisian bronzier Jean-François Denier in the early 1820s at a cost of over 34,000 francs. That's way over £1,000 at that time. And also a pietra dura cabinet based on a pietra dura clock face, a central part, which he had bought in Rome, and he had this made up for him as a clock cabinet by his agent and furniture supplier Robert Hume Jr. in London between 1820 and 1824. Alexander complemented these items with 2 pietra dura cabinets which he had acquired in Russia. They are now in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. Sorry, jumped a bit. And with a secretaire and commode in the centre by Adam Wieswaller. On the top right is a commode by Etienne Levasseur for the Comte d'Artois. It's made in 1777 and that's got the malachite top on it. And then in the bottom right is one of a pair of cabinets concocted by Vuillamis in London for the Duke's father-in-law, the great collector William Beckford, around 1803, using a 17th century Japanese lacquer box. So he's really concentrating on superb materials. In the mid-1820s, Alexander turned his attention to the famous Long Gallery, which housed most of the major full-length portraits of the main members of the Hamilton family, along with those of King Charles I and King Gustavus of Sweden that had been given to the first Duke of Hamilton in the 1630s. The old Long Gallery had been entered from the west end, from a staircase in the northwest tower, and Rubens's famous Daniel in the Lion's Den had been displayed on the short western wall, which would have been where the photographer was standing when he took his picture. In the mid-1820s, the 2 western and eastern towers were demolished, and the Duke and David Hamilton created a long, circuitous route to the Long Gallery, which is now entered from where the west wall and Rubens's painting had once been. In this altered setting, Alexander placed Rubens's painting in the centre of the north wall and began to develop a very, very strong black theme based on the use of black marble. In 1810, he had ordered 4 black marble chimney pieces for a drawing room, dining room and 2 bedrooms, and also 6 black marble tops for pier tables in the Long Gallery, all from David Hamilton. And in 1829, he commissioned 2 colossal black marble chimney pieces and a gigantic black marble door surround for the entrance-exit to the gallery, again from David Hamilton. He also flanked Rubens's painting with two huge arm bars or wardrobes by the French Royal Ebonist André Charles Boulle of about 1710, which are now in the Louvre. These were visually buttressing Rubens's painting, and they complemented and contributed to the black theme. With breathtaking arrogance, because that's what it must be, Alexander also dramatically installed his ambassadorial throne at the far east end of the gallery to give visual expression to his semi-regal status. During the 1830s, the 10th Duke went on to order and obtain two more colossal black marble chimney pieces and also a black marble door surrounds for the first floor grand entrance hall, which was on the other side of the north wall of the long gallery. He sourced these from London, from the London Marble and Stone Company, which was able to obtain much better black marble than David Hamilton. And the successful completion of the entrance hall led remorselessly on to the commissioning of a spectacular imperial staircase in black marble from the London Company around 1840, which took over 5 years to complete and cost over £10,000. There was no carefully worked out master plan for all this, it simply evolved. Nevertheless, we need to recognise that the chimney pieces and door surround in the long gallery were the first made stage in a quite exceptional use of black marble, which visually united the old and new parts of the palace. In the last years of his life, the Duke would extend the use of black marble into his mausoleum, and his ancient Egyptian sarcophagus would rest on a large plinth of black marble. Besides installing the two great armoires or wardrobes by Boulle, the Duke began to make extensive use of the colour red for carpets and curtains. This led him to develop two main overlapping colourways throughout the palace: black, using black marble and black furniture, and red, along with gilt bronze and gilt woodwork, to unite and unify the old and new parts of the palace and to awe people. By the time of his death in 1852, the long gallery and some of the other rooms were almost ablaze with red carpets and curtains. So let us see what the 10th Duke and also his son and heir William created, or perhaps more accurately, carefully constructed. On the left is an illustration of Edward, Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, arriving at the palace for an important visit in 1878. You can see the magnificent two-flight imperial staircase of hand-polished Irish black marble, and also the two gigantic bronze figures of Atlas, each weighing about a ton, which appeared to uphold the overhead black marble passageway. These were produced for the Duke by the Parisian founder Louis-Claude Francois Soyer between 1840 and 1842, and made the entrance for hall even more awe-inspiring. However, the 10th Duke made this initial entrance area even more daunting and indeed frightening by placing 3 busts of Roman emperors under the staircase and on the first landing, and his first 2 bronze busts of Peter the Great and Catherine the Great in the adjacent large ground floor hall. Under the stairs were the formidable porphyry-headed busts of the Emperors Augustus and Vespasian, which the Duke had purchased at the sale of George Watson's tailor's celebrated collection at Earlstock Manor near Devizes in 1832. And then, glowering down from the landing and almost challenging visitors to ascend to the Piano Nobile, was the basalt-headed bust of the Emperor Vespasian that the Duke had targeted and secured at the sale of Horace Walpole's famous collection at Strawberry Hill in 1842. After the 10th Duke's death, his son William added state portraits of the Emperor Napoleon III and the Empress Eugenie after Winterhalter. You can see Eugenie. This was obviously to immediately remind people that the 11th Duke's wife, Princess Marie of Baden, was a cousin of the Emperor Napoleon III. They would probably have been minded to think that they were looking at generous presents from an imperial couple to their relatives, very close friends, the Hamiltons, but this would have been an incorrect assumption because Napoleon III had actually given the portrait to the Grand Duchess Daphne of Baden and had been removed from Baden by Princess Marie after her mother's death in 1860. So this was a very smart, neat piece of aggrandizement. Having climbed the black marble staircase and turned left, visitors found themselves in the centrally positioned, large, double-height, ceremonial entrance hall replete with the two colossal black marble chimney pieces and door surrounds. Displayed in the central area are matching black marble plinths with bronze copies of 5 famous classical sculptures: the Apollo Belvedere, Diana of Versailles, Belvedere Antinous, Hercules of Telephus, and the Borghese Gladiator, which Alexander had acquired from France in 1830. These were of particular importance to the 10th Duke because they immediately indicated that he was a great connoisseur and collector, and also served to reinforce his claim to being a French Duke. Today we know that these statues have been cast by the French sculptor Hubert Le Soyer during the 1620s or 1630s, but during the 19th century they were believed to be made for King Francois I of France. Alexander definitely thought that he was displaying very major works commissioned by the greatest French patron and collector of the Renaissance. Moreover, he knew that he had succeeded in buying them after the Louvre had given up its attempt to do so in 1829, and that he had a much better set than his great but personally much despised rival, King George IV, who had only been able to install 4 casts of Diana, Antinous, Hercules and Telephus and the Gladiator in the East Terrace garden of Windsor Castle in the late 1820s. The 10th Duke emphasised the French aspect of the grand entrance hall by adding the 4 colossal tin-glazed earthenware busts of the 4 seasons and their plinths that had been made in Nicolas Fouquet's manufactory in Rouen in the 1730s and which he had bought in Paris in December 1851. The 11th Duke had also acquired the matching bust of Apollo in its plinth, but instead of placing these in the central niche in the south wall of the hall, he installed a colossal bronze bust of his late father, which had been modelled by the Scottish sculptor Thomas Campbell from an aborted bronze equestrian statue of the 10th Duke that would have been an almost exact copy of the great Roman equestrian statue of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius on the Capitoline in Rome. Thus, there was a line of impressive works behind the statues, which included 4 of the supreme surviving examples of 18th century French faience or tin-glazed earthenware. Looking down the hall from the top of the grand external staircase or the doorway from the black marble staircase, one would have seen the 10 sculptures partly framed by 2 colossal coats of arms of the 10th Duke, as a Knight of the Garter, and the 2 colossal porphyry vases with snake-shaped handles now in the Rothschild collection at Waddesdon Manor near Aylesbury. This, though, was a comparatively mild introduction to what followed, because in the double-height tribune, seen here, the square, yellow square, you had some of these works. Now, the tribune acted as a hub into other rooms on the arterial route through the palace, so it's where people would have congregated before they went into the dining room, or they came out from the Hamilton Library and they talked and so forth, so it was a really good holding place for people. In this very, very important room in the palace, the Duke decided to display 3 large religious paintings which reflected the power and glory of God and the terrible efficiency of his servants. The main work in the centre, now in the National Gallery in London, was the 7.5 by 9 foot altarpiece of the Reception of the Virgin Mary by God the Father into heaven, which was then thought to have been painted by Sandro Botticelli, but is actually by his Florentine contemporary Francesco Botticini. dating from 1475-77, this had been purchased by the Duke from the leading London picture dealer Samuel Woodburn in 1849-50. It was shown with two of the Duke's earlier acquisitions, a 7.5 by 5.5 foot altarpiece of the Archangel Michael thrusting Satan down into hell by the Sienese artist Ventura Salimbini of 1603, and the almost 7 by 5 foot painting, The Triumph of David, that is David returning in triumph carrying the head of Goliath, which was attributed to 17th century Bolognese artist Domenichino in the 19th century. More importantly, the Duke, the 11th Duke, decided to add to this. If we just go back, you can see at the bottom right that he's introducing a very large bronze copy of the Victory Column in the Place Vendôme in Paris, which has the statuette of the Emperor Napoleon on the top. He's putting this on the central table, which was already there. And then he's going on to use the west wall for these four items. On the back wall, you've got Winterhalter's state painting of Princess Marie of Baden. And then in the centre, you have got a replica of the marble bust, which the 11th Duke commissioned Patrick Park to do in Paris. It is of the Emperor Napoleon III, and it is in actual fact a very important work in the context of the Hamilton collection, because the Hamiltons had gone out to Paris to, in actual fact, support Napoleon at this stage. So this is endorsement of Napoleon and his policies. And the pair of busts on the left and right, Princess Marie and the Duke, are obviously supporting characters. It's a very important endorsement of the Emperor Napoleon III. There were all sorts of problems with the Emperor Napoleon III and Eugenie, but the Hamiltons were in actual fact, as I say, in support of Napoleon III when a lot of people weren't. This combination, coming after the items in the stairwell and the grand entrance hall, turned the tribute into one of the most unsettling and disturbing rooms in Victorian Scotland, and implied that the Dukes of Hamilton were semi-divine or semi-imperial individuals. The new state dining room was on the west side of the tribune, behind the grand portrait of the Princess Marie. It was here that the Duke, 10th Duke, played some of his cleverest mind games. Looking at Thomas Annan's photograph of the dining salon as it was in the late 1860s or 1870s, this does not seem to have been a particularly interesting room. One can make out the clock owned by Cardinal Henry, Duke of York, acquired by the 11th Duke and now in the Ashmolean Museum, on the chimneypiece, and the marble bust of the Aphrodite of Cnidos on the table on the right. The 10th Duke had acquired that from the Braschi Palace in Rome, and it's now in the British Museum. But it was in this room that the 10th Duke displayed his brilliant iconic portrait of Napoleon, working until after 2 o'clock in the morning on the Code Napoleon for the benefit of France and mankind. Opposite the 1st Duke's equestrian portrait of King Charles I, who had elevated him from 3rd Marquess of Hamilton to 1st Duke of Hamilton in 1643. Moreover, it was here that the 10th Duke also displayed his other most expensive painting, Velázquez's full-length portrait of King Philip IV of Spain in brown and silver, now in the National Gallery in London, which he had purchased from Samuel Woodburn for £1,000 in September 1846. These two paintings were hung side by side between the windows, with Philip IV on the left and Napoleon on the right, and they would have certainly have impressed the 10th Duke's guests. But what Alexander was doing here was congratulating himself and reminding a few other knowledgeable people that he had bettered his father-in-law William Beckford as a great collector, because he had snubbed and subsequently sold off Beckford's full-length painting of Philip IV by Gaspar de Crea of 1627-32, which is now owned by the Spanish state, in November 1845, and it replaced it with Velázquez's much superior painting in September 1846. Bettering Beckford was important to the Duke. It was one of a number of reasons he had exhibited the porphyry-headed busts of the two emperors, Roman emperors, in the ground floor entrance hall, because Beckford had been obliged to sell off his porphyry busts. And in the new state dining room, the Duke was forcefully demonstrating that he had once again bettered his father-in-law by placing the huge life-size bronze group of Laocoon and his sons by Charles Grosetier on top of the Farnese table in the alcove by the entrance to the room. This was an absolutely extraordinary act, but the 10th Duke was hammering home the point that he had the most important pietra dura table in existence, and had definitely beaten Beckford on this score, and that he also owned the Laocoon. This had belonged to Beckford, but Beckford had been obliged to sell it in 1822, and the Duke had subsequently targeted and secured this very imposing work, come trophy, at the famous sale of the collection of the 2nd Duke of Buckingham at Stowe in 1842. There are many aspects of this amazing room that should be discussed, but here we must confine ourselves to focusing on the fact that the Duke was also playing Napoleonic games in this room. As we've seen, he had placed Thorvaldsen's colossal bust of Napoleon in the tribune, and that David's portrait of Napoleon on the wall opposite the entrance to the dining room. But once again, this was not all. On the large dining table in the centre of the room, the Duke was able to set out the stupendous silver-gilt tea service supplied in connection with the Emperor's marriage to the Archduchess Maria Louise of Austria. Furthermore, there would have been hundreds of occasions in the mid-19th century when Princess Maria of Baden, the daughter of the adopted daughter of the Emperor Napoleon, would have been seated in the dining room entertaining guests. The Duke had laboured hard over 3 years to persuade his son William to marry her, which he finally did, with the Duchess' help in 1843, and Princess Maria of Baden was arguably the 10th Duke's greatest Napoleonic acquisition, as her mother's daughter and also as the cousin of the Emperor Napoleon III. We are fortunate to have over 30 good black and white photographs of the interiors of Hamilton Palace taken by Thomas Annan, Lafayette Studios and Country Life magazine between 1860 and 1919. But they can lead one to think that these rooms are very dark and sombre. However, the archival evidence in the Reverend Thomas Frognall Dibdin's account of a palace, published in 1838, revealed that this is a terrible misconception. Dibdin observes that the first thing that your eyes light upon in the gallery is the ceiling, upwards of 80 feet in length, divided into small square compartments, in the centre of which is a red fleur-de-lis, part of Douglas arms, relieved by a blue ground, the whole laid upon gold. According to Dibdin, the ceiling of the Hamilton Library, which was gilded in 1834, was a blaze of gold from one end to the other, while the new dining room, also completed in 1834, was of yet more dazzling splendour, the ceiling being, as it were, embedded in gold. Perhaps not surprisingly, the Duke began to run out of money around 1831-32 and had to postpone the fitting up of the 4 new staterooms until the early 1840s. There they are in the top right-hand corner. You can see the staircase, and it's the rooms to the right. When he resumed, the Duke created even more magnificent and colourful interiors. Here are Thomas Adam's 2 photographs of the first room, this new state drawing room. This and the 2 rooms which lay beyond them were decorated with 8 large tapestries as seen from Torquato Tasso's epic poem Jerusalem Liberated, woven in Rome in the 1730s. These rooms were understandably sometimes referred to as the new tapestry rooms. There was plenty of colour in these rooms, as we can immediately see from this example of one of the 8 tapestries showing the Crusaders reaching Jerusalem, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Moreover, the scenes represented are full of activity and human interest, and they animate these 3 rooms. The Duke installed important, large, colourful pieces of furniture in the drawing room. Here's the clock cabinet by Robert Hume, which we've already seen was used in the old staterooms, and it was now brought into the new staterooms and placed against the side wall to the right of the entrance of the drawing room. And here is the grand canopy with end seats for conversations by Blanchard and Rascalon of 1784. This was on the main wall opposite the windows, so it's really taking up all the space of that wall. It had been commissioned and supplied for Louis XVI's aunts, Adelaide and Victoire's palace, and it is subsequently reupholstered in Gobelin tapestries for Napoleon's apartment in the Tuileries Palace. It's now in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon. The Duke had some items which were black or partly black in the drawing room, but he developed his running use of black marble, the colour black, in the next room, with a great Louis XVI giltwood bed by George Jacob, with colourful Beauvais tapestry hangings, now in the Met and on display with modern Louis XVI style hangings, This was set off by 2 pedestal cabinets by André Charles Boulle, which were placed either side of the bed, and by 2 commodes or chests of drawers based on Boulle's designs. And these last 2 pieces are now in Philadelphia Museum of Art. The Duke's use of black climaxed in the next room, the dressing room, with the enormous and very black neoclassical writing desk and filing cabinet that had been made for the Parisian art collector Lalive de Julie around 1757. This is now in the Musée Condé à Chantilly, and the right-hand image shows it on display there, and it gives you an idea of the massive size of the desk and filing cabinet. The Duke placed many of his prized possessions in the final room, a small boudoir. You can see it right at the bottom of the projecting wing. That little room is marked boudoir. I hope you can pick it out. These items included the Japanese black lacquer secretaire that Jean-Henri Riester had made for Queen Marie Antoinette in 1783. And this obviously continued the use of black throughout the suite. But he also installed the life-size tapestry of Empress Catherine the Great that he had commissioned while in St. Petersburg in 1807-8, initially as the British ambassador and thereafter as the friend of the imperial family and of some of the most important Russian aristocrats. The secretaire and tapestry were complemented by some important paintings, most notably Andrea Mantegna's depictions of Vestal Virgin Tuccia and Sophis Fossenbach's drinking poison, which you can see to the immediate right of the secretaire. They're now in the National Gallery of London. And then to the right again is Rubens's portrait of Don Gaspar de Guzman, Count Duke of Olivares, the powerful Prime Minister of King Philip IV of Spain, now in the Belgian National Collection, Brussels. And then in the bottom right, there's Bronzino's portrait of Eleonora of Toledo, the wife of Cosimo de' Medici, the first Grand Duke of Tuscany, with one of their sons. That's now in Detroit Institute of Arts. So very, very important paintings, and people would immediately appreciate that. The Duke owned a number of works relating to the Medici family, not just Eleonora, and he sprinkled these around the palace. In this room, he also put the Adoration of the Kings, which was then attributed to Botticelli. It's now by Filippino Lippi. Now, the thing there is that he bought this and liked it because he thought that it depicted some of the Medici family worshipping the Christ child, and people were supposed to really appreciate this and to think of the Duke as a latter-day Medici. Now, as well as displaying these and a few other paintings, the Duke placed at least 7 important examples of decorative art from William Beckford's collection on the tops of the furniture and the chimney piece. They increased the range of the items in the boudoir, and they both complemented and jousted with the furniture, tapestries and paintings. The 2 17th century Flemish carved ivory pedestals decorated with bacchanalian processions may have been intended to synergize with Rubens's portrait of a Count Duke of Olivares, but they certainly clashed with Rubens's portrait of a Count Duke with Riesner's Secretaire, rather, and some of the other pieces. Similarly, the addition of a pair of 18th century Chinese celadon green porcelain vases with French gilt bronze mounts, which were then attributed to the leading Parisian goldsmith Francois Thomas Germain, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, did not really complement either the Secretaire or the tapestry. There was some visual harmonisation, but the Duke's paramount objective was to assemble a dense and disparate array of high-quality pieces rather than fabricate some sort of stylistic unity. He created further frisons by adding a 17th century high, fine black and gold china bottle richly mounted with gilt metal cover and rim at bottom, and the 2 highly unusual Chinese 18th century brown stoneware teapots in the form of a sheng, S-H-E-N-G, a Chinese musical instrument made from groups of reeds or bamboo tubes of different heights, which had been brought back from the 1845 Beckford sales, and these are now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. After they'd walked through the previous 3 extremely grand rooms and seen the contents of a boudoir, visitors must have wondered if they were in the palace of a monarch or indeed of a being from another world. Perhaps the most important thing to recognise is that Hamilton Palace was not just a treasure house with wonderful works of art in themselves, but it was intended to demonstrate, indeed bludgeon home, the fact that the Duke of Hamilton was not just the Duke of Hamilton, Duke of Brandon and Duke of Châtellerault, but he was of royal descent and the rightful King of Scotland, after the death of Cardinal Henry, Duke of York, the last direct male member of the Royal House of Stuart. After his death in 1852, the Duke was embalmed and interred in his Egyptian sarcophagus that he had acquired in 1836. And his sarcophagus was placed on a black marble plinth in the new Hamilton Mausoleum. It was all an astonishing production of exceptional connoisseurship and also of Olympian status. Thank you.